Greetings from the far side of the galaxy. I'm Fury, your host the most, back with the other half of this video. If you want the basic rundown for this video, click here to watch part 1 while I pick up where we left off. First, a follow-up. I'm like 90% sure that the Exile of Gehenna is Faust. In the treasure hunt event, Mephistopheles does straight up call the player Faust, so that's likely who the Exile is. Now, getting back on track. So I'm gonna go ahead and do Garodamana, Garothman, or whatever Life Wonders is calling it right now. The Exile of Garodamana is Ahriman. We can deduce from real-world myth that Ahriman will be the brother of the world representative of Garothman, Ahura Mazda. And we know the world works by strictly categorizing things as either good or evil. Women were not allowed to be knights, and because Tiamat became a knight anyway, she was labeled evil. Ahriman was already labeled evil, so he was the only one willing to become her lord. She describes him as a sad man, which fits with someone deemed evil for no good reason. We don't know enough about Ahriman to do any interpretation, so we're just moving on to the next exile, Tiamat from Babylon. We know that they were a dragon of destruction and an ancestor of the world representative Marduk. Marduk describes them as being a manifold dragon, but what that means is still super unclear. We know Tiamat, Marduk, and Mushu all have the same power, and that's the ability to be reborn. Just like how Marduk can come back by being eaten by Mushu, so can Tiamat, but he stopped this process by splitting her up to create the world of Babylon. The little we do know of Tiamat is surprisingly accurate to the myth. In the myths, Marduk and Tiamat did fight, and he did use her body to create the world. While both Housamo and the myths agree that Tiamat is a singular character, they also believe that she was a force of nature, literally being primordial chaos. The many references to dragons is a reference to the fact that Tiamat was a dragon in the myth and gave birth to the first of them. Are you beginning to notice a theme around the exiles and dragons? Well, that even continues into the next world, Aru, the world based on Egyptian mythology. This world's exile is Seth. Not that Seth, that's actually Ash, although he and the OG Seth apparently looked similar. Most of this comes from the Kabukicho Night event, so I'm working with a lot of untranslated material here. One of the most important things to happen in Aru was the return from the Duat. It's Aru's method of continuation. Upon death, the dead are brought to journey through an underworld passage, returning in a new form but with new life. But that's only on the condition that the great snake Apophis judged them as being good. If not, his belly is where you'll spend eternity. Seth's job was not only to fight off Apophis, but to reverse the Saiyans, thus bringing people back from the inescapable Duat. That's because his rule of rending was to cut paths, which I think means he was able to give direction and allow escape from otherwise impossible scenarios. Despite his integral role to the way Aru worked, Seth did find time to do other things like fight with his nephew Horus. Although, keep this on the DL, that was just for show. The two of them actually had a pretty good relationship, which is kind of weird since he was a delinquent playboy to such an extent that he was associated with aphrodisiacs, but he was all around a pretty good guy. Seth even found time to become sworn brothers with Seth. Okay, not Seth, but like Ash Seth, I mean. The two of them went on many adventures doing all sorts of stuff around Aru, but like every exile story, things don't have a happy ending. Osiris is murdered, and the bloody weapon found in Seth's room. But when called to the stand, Seth refused to defend himself. He did nothing, he just sat there and let it happen. He was sentenced to death by way of the great snake Apophis, but Horus let him sneak out of the world, and thus Seth became an exile. It was only after his departure did Aru learn that it was just a ploy by the nobles to get rid of Seth. There is one more detail about Seth that I couldn't find a good way to fit until the end, and that's that Seth wasn't just Seth, and I'm not talking about Ash. God damn, this is so confusing. You know Apophis, the great snake that ate souls, the one Seth had to fight? Well, they might have been the same person. How did that work? No idea, but it's what we're led to believe. Honestly, there's a lot of references to the myth in Aru, enough to rival even El Dorado. I like the choice to make Seth and Ash brothers because there's a possibility that they were the same, if not syncretic deities. The whole thing about the boat traveling through the Duat is real, and so is the Great Snake Apophis. While they weren't the same in the myth, Seth was the one to fight him. Although the snake wasn't the one to judge souls, that was Anubis and Amet. Seth and Horus fighting alongside Osiris' death is mirrored in the myth, just without the whole being bros part. They kind of hated each other. Up next, why don't we do Shangri-La? The Exile of Shangri-La was Ashra and technically Varuna, I think. It's complicated. So the story begins in Shangri-La, which propagates itself through reincarnation. It works very similarly to Aru. Those who return lose who they were, so people desperately clung to things that made them themselves. The only one who escaped this was Siddhartha, the Buddha, the smoky god. He preached his method of letting go of attachments to everyone, but there was one dude who refused to listen. His friend, Ashra. Ashra was the heroic type. He didn't like to lose and was constantly sacrificing themselves for their friends, a lot like the current protagonist. After fighting Smoky God to a standstill, the two of them became friends, and he was receptive to Smoky God's advice at first. However, much like all things in life, things got more complicated when a woman entered the fray. They're unnamed, but by going who Ashra is based on, I'm assuming that it was their daughter. In short, someone attacked her, and Ashra decided to play Ashra's Wrath, forever trapping them in a cycle of reincarnation. However, it appears that Ashra exiled themselves because their rule of rending was to cut identities? And yeah, I have no idea what that means either. This may have to do with worlds not being as separate as we like to think, like how Hakumen can technically be 3 people from 3 different worlds. We know Ashra used his rule of rending on himself, becoming Varuna, who later became Kameteva. How the fuck does any of that work? I don't know, so I'm just gonna wash my hands of this and move on to the interpretations. In the myths, Ashra isn't actually a single character, but rather the name for a variety of demons from Buddhism. In Samsaric reincarnation, those who die violent deaths with hate in their hearts get reborn as one of these angry, battle-hungry deities. The Exile in particular seems to be based on Vimacitrin, the king of the Ashras. The way his story goes is that in the myths, his arch-enemy ends up seducing his daughter, thus making them family. Real quick, since we're like halfway through the video, please remember to like and subscribe and donate to my Ko-fi and Patreon. The next world we're covering is Yggdrasil, and the exile of that world is Freyr. Yggdrasil is based on Norse mythology and follows the usual setup of Ragnarok. The war where the gods will fall at the hands of the giants and the great tree shall burn in the flames of Surtur. Freyr was doomed to fall in battle to Surtur, so the gods made a replacement, the golden boar Gillenbursti. Designed from the ground up to be Freyr in everything but name, even their appearances were supposed to be very similar. However, on the promised day, it was not Gillenbursti who took Freyr's place, but the other way around. We learn in the Year of the Golden Boar event that it's due to Freyr respecting Gillenbursti's identity as a person. To Freyr, Gillenbursti was not a tool to be used, but a friend to be cherished. And so, just like the prophecy said, Freyr fell in battle to Surtur. Maybe it would have gone differently if Gillenbursti still had Freyr's sword with its own rule of rending. It had the ability to cut defeat, which is exactly what it sounds like. Maybe there's a reason Gillenbursti doesn't show up in the main quest, cause he still has that sword. Going to the interpretations, Freyr and Gillenbursti did exist in the myths, although Gillenbursti wasn't an anthro dude, he was literally a golden boar. And Freyr didn't lose the sword because he left it with Gillenbursti, he lost it trying to marry a giant. Next up, because I want to do something easy, is Helioopolis. We don't know. Like, no, seriously, I'm not making a joke, we genuinely don't know. We don't have a single character from Helioopolis, we don't even know what it's based on, I can't even make a guess at who the world rep is, let alone the Exile. I don't know how Life Runners managed to go 6 years without using an entire world, but hey, they do they, I guess. But I don't need to make a guess who the next Exile will be, because it's Hayoka from the world of Great Spirit. Not a mediocre spirit, mind you, but a great one. The way the world worked was through the blessings of the titular Great Spirit, Wakantanka. Well, not that one, this one, Wakantanka Mugen, his true form. Mugen comes about because when entering Tokyo, Wakan got a physical body, but after it was worn down, he returned to his proper form as the disembodied Great Spirit. He distributed his blessings to the people of Great Spirit and thus earned their favor, but it could not be reciprocated. Wakantanka had to be equal with his favor, which is why Hyoka was such a problem. Hyoka was sort of like the contrarian jester of Great Spirit. In times of happiness, he'd be crying, and in times of sadness, he'd be hollering with joy. Despite doing this out of kindness for the minority, Hyoka quickly became a pariah. The only one who seemed to like him was Thunderbird. Hyoka taught the eagle how to fish, and when Hyoka was exiled, Thunderbird took up heroing in his stead. Because Hyoka was such a contrarian, something began to stir within Wakantanka. A feeling of dislike. Was he not doing a good enough job? Was Hyoka just a liar? Who was Hyoka to constantly be undermining him? And since Wakantanka couldn't have any biases for or against anyone, Hyoka had to be removed. And it's implied Wakantanka did that by way of a literal lightning bolt smiting his ass into oblivion. We don't know what their rule of rending did, so I'm just gonna move on to the interpretations. Hyoka, rather than just being a god, was a sort of role in the Sioux people. Not dissimilar to a king's jester, they existed to say the unpopular and point out that which people didn't want to hear, so that part is similar. They also played a notable role in medicinal and funerary rituals. The exile of the next world is Veles, the brother of Volos and the god of poetry and the dead, from the world Kitse. Veles was a dragon, who would have guessed, with a cynical personality that put him at odds with his home world. The pervading theme of Kitse is best seen through Perun's sacred artifact. A millstone that can crush and grind faith, turning it into a single gestalt whole, but Veles stood in stark contrast to that. We don't know what Veles's rule of rending did exactly, but my guess is that it worked similarly to Akihagongen. I'm guessing it's something like cutting connections or the excess, the ability to trim the fat so that Veles only had a single isolated target. Veles's art always had the theme of death and separation, something Perun and Kitse as a whole could not stand. Kinda. Because they all loved his art, even Perun envied Veles's talent. So Veles and Perun made an agreement. Veles would stay over here and Perun would stay over there, but for some reason or another, Veles broke that contract and was smote by Perun. Getting into the interpretations, Veles is unsurprisingly based on a god of the same name, but so is Volos. It seems Lifeunder split a single deity into two characters. Volos got the agricultural elements while Veles got the musical and death elements. An interesting case that I think is unique to both Volos and Velos, but there is something equally interesting in the next world, Bora Bora. That being said, we have no idea who the Exile is. Like for realsies, they just haven't told us anything about them. If I have to make a guess, I figure the world's exile is Maui because he's the other character with the strongest connection to the world's representative, Tanganroa. In some versions of the myth, Maui supposedly stole fire from him instead of the lava goddess. Okay, so it looks like this is going to be a three-parter because it's like 6 AM on the Sunday this is supposed to be up and I still have like 8 more exiles to go. So let's bring this video to a close by hitting up the Patreon shoutouts. For our 3 stars, we have special thanks to 87 Werehog, Deku, Zora Chao, Choron, Garyon Lefay, Dragon King Yara, and Kayun. For 4 stars, we have Miki Moon and Unknown RC, the Lion and the Lamb. For our Super D-Tuper special 5-star shoutouts, we have first Vanilla Flower, the Killing Angel. Then Poor Mage, the Panzer Bride. Next, Sky King 64, the Rusty Angel. And finally, Mahagasaur, the Last Blade. Thank you for watching, do be sure to like and subscribe, and as always, this is your host Fury signing out.